unmute yourself only when the moderator calls upon your name. I will now invite Professor Oberoi to begin the proceedings. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's lovely to see old friends in this panel, as well as soon to be very good friends of the younger generation. And this panel follows on in a way from the very brilliant address of Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon earlier at the inaugural, where he was talking about the internal drivers of China's foreign policy. Now, I don't know whether at the end of this we will be able to link up these two themes, but what one might say is that attention to the family in the context is something that is of major importance for understanding polity and policy all over the world, and the Asian region is no exception. So we have here 4 presentations, and I think that we will begin with Professor Mary John, is that right? And Professor Emiko Ochiai. Her biography has already been spelled out, and her title is Transforming Familialism. It's a rather new word for most of us and quite a tongue twister, changing care regimes and gender roles in 21st century East Asia. It's a great pleasure for us that she's speaking about wider East Asia, because she is someone who has taken a comparative view of East Asian and also Southeast Asian families and intimacies and the problems associated with the family. So, and family policy. So, Professor Ochiai, I believe you have a PowerPoint to present, and perhaps someone will be operating that for you. Here we are. Do go ahead.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for your kind introduction. It's a great honor for me to attend this workshop. To be honest, I want to visit Delhi physically, but well, this is the second best now. Okay, so please let me share screen. I hope I can do that. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can. We can.
So I have 12 minutes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I will do my best. The title is just introduced. I have conducted 2 projects in the 21st century to compare Asian gender and care regimes. The first project was conducted in early 2000s. And these are the publications from that project in English, Japanese, and Chinese, and also in Thai. It's not here, but we have a Thai book too. And the aim of our project was a comparison of gender and care practices in 6 Asian societies, including China, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, Thailand, and Japan. And we studied both childcare and elderly care. And the method we took was fieldwork with semi-structured interviews. And we also conducted some questionnaire surveys, but only in selected societies. And this is the outcome of the project. This is about social networks for childcare. A means very good, and B means so good. C is not so effective, and D is almost non-existent. And I put blue colors for A. As you see, China is quite blue. It means it has good and effective social networks for childcare. And Singapore seems to be the second, but Korea and Japan are so bad, yellow and red. So societies with high labor force participation of women during their child rearing period, it means China, Singapore, Thailand, and Taiwan, they have many effective care providers. Please look at this figure of women's labor force participation by age at the beginning of 2000s when the study was conducted. As you see, China, Thailand have highest labor force participation, followed by Singapore, and Korea and Japan had M shape. And so societies with low labor force participation of women during child rearing period, it means Korea and Japan, we can see few effective care providers are helping the family, as you see here. So to our eyes, China looked to be a paradise for child rearing and for working mothers. And Asian familialism was proved to be a myth, except for Japan and Korea. Other societies had quite effective care providers outside the family. I want to show you some examples from China. Grandparents and men and community and kindergarten and nurseries. I cannot pronounce zentaku it means the kids were kept in the nurseries for weekdays, and then only came back to their families at the weekend. So it was a full system for childcare. Then let's look at the table for elderly care. Elderly care is more familialistic compared to childcare. But as you see, community is effective in China. It means 下주. My pronunciation is not good. Community in China. And care workers, domestic workers are quite effective in Singapore and Taiwan. In China, we saw many men taking care of elderly parents. The photo in the center shows the men carrying lunch box or dinner box to their parents in the hospital. This was very impressive for Japanese researchers. And we also saw community elderly home in Shaju. So this is what we saw in China. So we were quite impressed. And we can say Asian familialism is a myth. So we have to look for the ways to go beyond it. So we decided to look at the balance of the sectors, including the state, market, family, and community or voluntary sector. This diagram is called the care diamond. We looked at the balance of the 4 sectors. In Europe, the state is most effective as welfare providers, but in Asian societies, all the 4 sectors were effective. Okay, this is the care diamond in China for childcare and elderly care. As you see, for childcare, the state sector was effective. And for the elderly care, community sector was activated by the state. And as you see, families and relatives are quite important. And in Singapore, the market sector was quite large. And in Taiwan, market sector was large only for elderly care because of the state regulation. This is the policy of the government to promote migrant caretakers only for elderly care. And this is Japan. For elderly care, Japan just started long-term care insurance. But for child care, the state role was still limited. And this is Korea, and this is Thailand. Thai parents were suffering from the lack of support. So this is a theoretical diagram. We have to think about de-familialization of care. It happens into two directions. De-familialization of care through the state and through the market. And as you see, four types of society can be distinguished by the strength of de-familialization to these two directions. So this is the summary figure to show the patterns of de-familialization in Asian societies on childcare and elderly care in the early 2000s. As you see, China is in the socialism and transitional socialism area. And in the developmentalism area, where the state and the market are both strong, Singapore, you can see Singapore there. And Singapore for elderly care, and Korea, Taiwan in liberal familialism sector, which means only the market is effective and the state is not working well. And in the familialism sector, and you can see Japan and Thailand. And for Thailand, we coined the term extended familialism because the relatives are quite effective in Thailand compared to Japan. So this is the pattern of early 2000s. So what can we see now? We conducted a new project in the 2010s. We focused on the changes in one decade. And we added Vietnam, and Thailand was dropped. And we decided to use a quantitative method, but the lack of comparative data was a serious problem. And we also used individual researches in each society. And this is the book we are preparing. I hope it will be published next year. So part 2 include country chapters, and part 3 include quantitative comparison and migration and socialist legacy and female labor market. So today I want to talk about quantitative comparison and socialist legacy. But I have to be very brief because of the time. To be honest, the quantitative comparison was not so successful. We used care time or the number of care recipients to decide the size of each sector, the contribution of each sector. But data availability was a big problem. For the care provision for children under 5, we could compare only 4 societies. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. So Vietnam is quite state-oriented, and Korea is more market-oriented, like this. So we have some results from this comparison, but we were not very happy with this because of data limitation. And we also realized that difference between provision and finance is important. We only focused on provision, but as you know, European welfare states are transforming, and they are now becoming financing welfare states, which means they provide subsidies for the families who used market. And if you only look at provision, de-familialization by market doesn't mean the de-familialization of care finance. So even if you can buy some care services in the market, you have to pay its cost for yourself. So this is the problem. So we've come to a new diagram to show de-familialization of care provision and de-familialization of care finance. But our study is still in progress in this area. But I can show you some results from the comparison of China and Vietnam and post-socialist European countries, because we were so curious to know if re-familialization of welfare and re-traditionalization of family and gender, which is happening in post-socialist European countries, is also happening in China and Vietnam. But there are 3 differences between these 2 regions: economic success in Asia, and the absence of EU framework in Asia. Okay, I will only tell you a very important finding. The care for children aged 3 to 6 is still done by the state. State is doing good job. In China, work unit run kindergartens decreased, but other kind of state-run kindergartens is increasing. So the state is still there for the care of children between 3 and 6. But the problem is the care for children aged 0 to 3. The state has radically reduced aid to nursery schools for this age group. So private babysitters and nannies are common now. And maternity leave is good, but it was interesting to find parental leaves has not been adopted in either mainland China or Vietnam. And child allowance is also very limited in China and Vietnam. And grandparents are playing even greater role in the post-transitional period. So re-familialization is happening. And in these countries, part-time jobs are limited. And but women are still in labor market. The participation rates of women in labor force is decreasing in China, not in Vietnam, but the majority of women are still in the labor force. And we found no explicit genderizing policies in both countries, but now I doubt it. After the two-child policies in China, are they doing any explicit genderizing policies? I want to ask this question to Chinese colleagues. And men were doing household chores and care work in early 2000, but they are retreating from this area. This is important for women. Okay. So conclusion, in China and Vietnam, there's no explicit familialism. It means they don't have parental leave or child allowance and part-time jobs, which are good for the families to take care of kids for themselves. And due to the closure of nurseries for children 0 to 2, re-familialization is happening and care is genderized. But there are 3 factors making childcare less stressful in China and Vietnam. First one is intranational migrants, and the second one is market solutions, and the third one is extended familialization, help of grandparents. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Sorry for time.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very thought-provoking account with 2 time periods, bringing it very close to present times, and several important issues to think of, with reference to socialist and post-socialist states. So thank you very much. And the time was quite good. So now we go on to Professor Mary John, who is going to take up what seems to be a simple and straightforward problem. Nothing is simple and straightforward when Professor Mary John deals with it. You will be in for some really interesting insights into the question of child marriage in India and China compared. Thank you very much for being with us, Mary. And this is, I might say, it wasn't reported in the introduction, but this is a topic of a theme of a very recent publication that she has just produced, which is quite an eye-opener in terms of comparative understanding. So thank you, Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Patricia, for that very warm introduction. So yes, can I be seen? Am I visible?
You're visible, Mary.
Okay, thanks.
Only in a little box, but never mind.
All right. Okay. So thanks very much to the organizers, to Shantiniketan, to the AICCS for having someone like me, a complete interloper, because I don't really work on China. But in the context of the introduction that Professor Oberoi gave, I have in fact recently written a book on child marriage in an international context. I mean, specializing mainly in India, but one of the interesting discoveries I made along the way was to look a little bit at China, that only in terms of secondary material, as you will see. And what I'm going to present here is a very, very small. I'm not sure that I will do justice to what Patricia Oberoi suggested, because I'm just going to present very, very minimal facts, as it were, for us to think about in the time that we have. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so India, China, and gender. And what do we share? To start off with, and I'm sure there's, all of you present here have done enormous work in these areas. At a very, very general level, we do have comparable histories of highly patriarchal and patrilineal familial structures that thanks to the kind of material available even historically have been excavated over long periods of time using all kinds of ancient resources. This is just very, very just a pin, a very small point that I'm making here about very large history with all its complexity. So bear with me here. And I'm jumping from these historical comparative moments to the 19th century, which again, in very different contexts, of course, India being part of a colonial moment in a way that China was not. Nonetheless, 19th century social reform was in both these spaces. Social reform came to have a very interesting and very strong relationship to women. In other words, women and the social were seen to be inextricably linked. The very idea of the social and women carried a new charge in this time. And I think even in cases like China, neologisms were created in this time, which we also to some extent have in India. Marriage was one of the major institutions to become part of this social reform effort, including child marriage. However, if we move forward to the 20th century, and again, there is no time to sort of dwell on this at any length at all, simply to say that our histories were really more divergent than parallel at every level, economically, socially, and politically. So it's not that I'm looking for commonalities when I'm asking what kind of sharing or what kind of way of thinking together could we look at. by taking full account of whether we want to call them socialist and post-socialist, whether we want to call ours developmental, Nehruvian, and now neoliberal, however we look at them, these 20th century into the 21st century have been remarkably different. Next slide, please. Now, when we come to the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and we look at existing work on our two countries, the one big one that keeps cropping up, and it's an area that I have worked in myself, at least from the Indian side, is the adverse sex ratio and its demographic fallout. The fact that whatever reasons we may give to it, whether it be the one-child policy in the case of China, or our forms of developmentalism and our kind of reasons for fertility decline, which were not exactly dictated by state policy. We have both nations now have, at least in certain regions, the phenomenon of too few women and too many men. And this has seen its share of comparative work with some very interesting kind of concerns that have been raised as a consequence. So my interest in child marriage has come about as a response to the new global focus on child marriage, where child marriage is a definition here, marriage that takes place before a girl or a boy is 18 years old technically counts as child marriage in terms of international child rights concerns. Of course, it should be borne in mind that these may or may not directly match up with legal ages at minimum marriage. In India, the legal ages right now are 18 for girls and 21 for boys. And in China, it's actually older, it's 20 and 22. So the issue here is that on the one hand, the case of India is hyper visible. We have by far the largest numbers in the world, in terms of what is sometimes called child marriage, sometimes called early marriage. And hence, a huge campaign is underway, and I'm not going to dwell on the nature of that campaign and the problems I have with that campaign, but it is in the wake of an international campaign and international agencies that countries like India have become re-visible, as it were, from an earlier colonial moment when child marriage was there. It has come back onto the agenda of states, of NGOs, and so on. We have, if you want to just take one number, 100 million totally, about 85 million girls and women and 15 million men would be the total number at all ages of a population in India that have married before the age of 18. China, on the other hand, is all but invisible. In fact, it would maybe be surprising to many why am I even raising the issue of child marriage? There is no data. If you look at UNICEF data, China does not appear in any of the data sets on marrying before the age of 18. Next slide, please. Next slide. Is there a problem with the next slide?
Shruti, can we have the next slide? Ma'am, I'll just check.
Okay.
It seems the screen is frozen.
Okay.
We're working on it, ma'am.
Okay. All right, let me just keep talking. The next slide was actually a graph, just to give you a very minimal entry into the Indian history story, where the graph shows you the trends in what we might call the mean age at marriage in the Indian context from 1901 to 2011. Mean age at marriage, here we are. Thank you so much. Yeah. Mean age at marriage was in the region of 12 years as in 1901. It's stagnant, you could say, dips a bit till 1931, and then it has this characteristic slow upward creep over the subsequent decades. And it's now, the mean age is around 20.8 as of the most recent census of 2011. Next slide, please. Well, my next slide would have shown you a map of India, in which you would see a district kind of map, which would show you the distribution as per the same census 2011. You would see the ways in which there is a kind of clustering as well as an uneven story of decline. We have about 20, we have an average of 20% who are marrying below, as of now, as of the most recent data, who marry before the age of 18. This was, in fact, 10 years ago, it was almost double that figure. So there have been significant declines, and there is a clustering, east, west, and south. There are regions which have the much higher, 30 to 40%, and then there are other parts of the country, both central and south, where it drops to about 10%. So this is the context, and my own work has actually been taking issue with the way in which age has been seen to be the single most important problem about the institution of marriage in India, and the way in which marrying too young has been seen to be the only problem or the reasons why child marriage is called a harmful practice, to use the language of the UN. I have taken some issue with that, to say that there's actually a whole range of characteristics that go into why and how women marry when they do, and to think that there is a single most important locus for the problem that can be fixed by raising the age at marriage, because that is the way in which international donors work. There are huge campaigns and enormous amounts of NGO activity to raise the age at marriage from what it is now, say, amongst those who marry too young, mostly in the age group of 15, 16, 17, to ensure that they marry at the age of 18. And my argument here is that simply raising the age at marriage to 18 or 19 or 20, leaving other things untouched, is actually not going to make much change happen. And I've used data as well as other arguments to bolster that. Let me move now. I'm sorry that the screen does not seem to be working. To the story of China. China, I have not done any work of my own on China. I was just interested to know, other than the most obvious countries that we are constantly compared to, we are compared to our neighbors like Bangladesh and Nepal. We are compared to countries in the African context, some of whom have even higher rates of early marriage than we do. So I thought to myself, why not look for comparisons elsewhere, in nations that are not associated. Oh, thank you. I think something is emerging. Thank you so much. I was interested in comparisons with the two most powerful nations in the world, if you like, the one being the US and the other being China. US is not going to be my topic today, but for those of you who might be interested to know, there are many states in the US that don't even have a minimum age at marriage in their statute books, and child marriage continues to be a presence in that country. China, when I looked for material on China, I came across two sources. One was a statistical account from the Beijing news media, and the other was a photo essay from Mail Online, both in 2018. This was the year when I was actually putting together my book, and it so happens that both these essays popped up. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is from the news report, from the Beijing news report, and it gives you, keep in mind, however, that these are ages at marriage, or rather underage marriages as per Chinese law. Blue is men and red is women. And these are the proportions of those who marry before their legal age. That is, men who are marrying before the age of 22, women who are marrying before the age of 20 over the last 30 years or so. So this is the kind of data that is, in fact, this particular article is very interesting to read. It was in Chinese, and I have to thank Usha for, I read no Chinese whatsoever, for translating it for me and making this material available. So here is this author who is putting out to the audience here the fact that there is indeed fairly significant underage marriage happening in China. Next slide, please. So this is further to this article, which gives us now data in various forms. One of them is in the form of these bar graphs, where you see underage marriage in village, town, and well, I should say city, town, and village. And with very obviously, the more rural you get, the more further away from a metropolitan city, the higher the proportions. Another very interesting, which I've given you in the form of a little bit of a text, is the districts. So there are districts where very high proportions of upwards of 30 to 40% are marrying below the legal age. And you can see the list of some of these districts. More men than women, insofar as the men's age is 22 and the women's is 20. And the other very, very fascinating point that this author makes without further qualifying it is to say that from 1990 to 2010, the rate of early marriages in certain regions, instead of declining, actually rose. So to me, that was really, really interesting. It's put out there for the reader without further qualification. Next slide. Okay. This is the photo news report, the photo essay that I also mentioned to you, which has many, I mean, I just chose one here, has many pictures like this one. I think many of them from Henan district, showing you young teenage couples, invariably with a baby in the picture as well, telling us a little bit about each one of them, how they're managing or not managing. Next slide, please. So the commentary that went along with these pictures was to tell us that underage marriages are in fact quite common in rural China, that families register these marriages after they have come of age to escape scrutiny, I imagine. And interestingly, one of the reasons given for why this is so common is the gender imbalance. That is to say, boys do not want to wait for their parents to find a suitable girl, but would rather go ahead on their own and are in a hurry to get married, fall in love as teenagers in school, drop out, and get married, especially if the girl gets pregnant. Interestingly, they also talked about, the article also talked about how do these families cope, given the fact that these are high school dropouts, invariably the dependency on parents and on grandparents. That is to say, grandparents then look after the babies, the small children, while the young couple migrates for work. So next slide, please. So here's a picture precisely of such a migrant couple. You see the, probably taken by the grandparents, you see the child being hooked up to the monitor to be able to chat with the parents the teenage parents who are many miles away. Next slide. So these are my concluding questions for us to think with. So at this very superficial level, we might say, why am I bringing these two together? We have huge numbers marrying below the age of 18. Marriages below the age 18 in China are very small, probably single digit. Though on the other hand, there is so much underreporting that we cannot be absolutely sure. So why would I want to try and make anything interesting when ours is clearly a much bigger phenomenon than is the case in China? Moreover, China has nothing to say about early marriage, whereas our own government has even last year proposed that the age of marriage of girls be raised from 18 to 21. So China's policies, priorities are clearly elsewhere, and largely in I would call it now a kind of pro-natalist position, having lifted the one child and two child policy. Whereas we in India persist, I think rather mistakenly, in talking about population explosion. However, in spite of these obviously very, very different kinds of locations and state level priorities, my suggestion is to say that in both our contexts, teenagers are marrying mostly from social groups that are variously identified as rural, as poor, as disadvantaged, as ethnic minorities, or as having religious beliefs, and with little by way of choices. So rather than dwell on numbers, I think the persistence of practices that push the very young to marry can be of comparative value. And this is what I would suggest that we might think about ahead. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that very comprehensive exposition. And I think you will have convinced everyone that it's certainly a problem worth looking at in China, as in India, and worth looking at with new eyes for the sources of youthful marriage and so on. So I'm sorry about the hitch with the...
No problem.
But not too long and not too bad. And thanks to those who helped write it. So now we must move on to the next presentations. I have great pleasure in calling on Sung Yuan Meng, who's a PhD candidate in Kyoto University. And she has done and is in the process of doing a very empirical study of reports on resistance to state-controlled reproduction and the difference between different media outlets. I'll let her explain herself. Ms. Sung, I know that you have a very detailed PowerPoint, but I think we need to be a little fast. So do keep up a good pace, if you don't mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kindly introduction. I will share my PowerPoint. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, it's a very great pleasure to present here. The title of my presentation is The Resistance to State-Controlled Reproduction, Varieties of Media Responses to China's Two-Child Policy. Firstly, I want to bring out the history of birth planning campaign in China. China started birth control from 1950s. From 1979, a national one-child policy has been enforced on the majority of Chinese families. Nowadays, serious social issues such as a rapidly aging population with low birth rate came to the fore. Thus, the government relaxed the birth control gradually from 2010. In 2013, the regulation was relaxed to allowing couples to have two children if one parent was the only child. From 2016, all couples are allowed to have two children under the full two-child policy. Since this year, all couples are allowed to have 3 children. But we can see from Figure 1, after the two-child policy, birth rate still continues to decline. Previous studies mainly have 2 parts. One, the two-child policy. The discuss contains how do the policy transformation affect the society and the factors which cause the low fertility intention. But the discussion on how individuals perceive response to the state's intervention with their bodies is not enough. 2. Family planning. Family planning in East Asia has been directly promoted by the state in contrast to the West. So many research discuss the promotion of family planning by the state and how people react to it. For example, Kohama emphasizes that women were not passive recipients of the one-child policy, but rather voluntary actors who sometimes allied with the state against the patriarchy and sometimes expressed their own will against the state. My study learned a lot from this view and developed my research question, that is to illustrate people's perceptions, responses to the new fertility policies and the new family model expected by the state. My research subjects have 4 parts. The state controlled the newspaper People's Daily and other local newspapers like Tongchuan Daily. The first 2 parts are aimed at funding the new family model expected by the state and the local societies. Weibo tweets and comments on Weibo tweets. These 2 parts are aimed at funding how people perceive the new family model and react to it. About the specific research methods, I collected 185 reports in People's Daily containing the keyword "two-child", 158 reports and 197 reports in local newspaper, which focus on the aspects like worries or happiness as regards to children. And I collected 472 Weibo tweets to find out what are the aspects of policy transformation that people usually pay attention to. Lastly, comments on 3 Weibo tweets, which attract a lot of attention to see how people are interpreting this policy transformation. Firstly, about the People's Daily, we can see 5 different stages in 2010s. The first period is before 2012, when even the regulations on birth planning had begun to be relaxed. However, the word two-child still held a negative image. But since 2013, with a report about the end of demographic dividend, two-child became an essential part to solve the demographic problem. In second half of 2015, experts' opinions like the average ideal number of children is 1.9 are used frequently to show that policy transformation is intended to respect people's fertility intention. After a national two-child policy in 2016, many specific measures to increase the birth rate, like improvement of the childcare and education environment, has been reported. But after 2019, reports on two-child policy declined sharply and dramatically. In brief, People's Daily draws a range of demographic and fertility expertise to indoctrinate the public with the new family model expected by the state. However, the driving force of policy transformation is the stability of the whole state and society as a result for the well-being of the whole population. The worries about two children expressed in local newspapers are mainly concentrated on the second half of 2014, 2016, and 2017. Interestingly, the worries in these 3 different periods are also different in nature. Especially in 2016, there were heated discussions on problems in sibling relations, that fearing to lose affection from parents, the first child opposed the birth of the second child. The newspapers draw on the accumulated wisdom of everyday life, the so-called everyday knowledge, like emphasizing the role of family education. In short, rather than not willing to have a second child, local newspapers display these worries as an assumption for wanting to have a second child. Society sees reproduction as something that is subordinate to the family rather than individual freedom. And the promotion of the two-child policy is supported by the idea of overcoming daily problems using the wisdom accumulated in everyday life. The happiness of having two children contains three parts. Policy transformation and promotion of it in local communities are believed to be able to lead people to happiness. The biggest part of this campaign is the construction of the image of happy four-person family by showing the examples of families which are about to have a second child or who have had a second child. There are two photos reported by local newspapers. The family in the photo above already has a son aged 18 who is not in the photo. In brief, local newspapers connect the policy transformation with the well-being of the people in a positive way, and being the media closer to people's daily life, they send out the new family model by describing the examples of happy four-person family. Now coming to the Weibo tweets, many young users, which aimed at finding what are the aspects of two-child that individuals pay attention to. These mainly have three parts. First one is family connection, including parent, children, and sibling relationships. Instead of the image of happy four-person family and the benefits of having two children, it frequently mentions the aspects neglected by the mass media, mainly economic factors such as the cost of childcare and income. Now coming to the demographic changes and the implementation of policies. In this aspect, Weibo shows a completely different opinion from the people's daily. The people in Weibo show pessimistic attitude to the foreign birth rate and focus their eye on problems encountered on site. About the specific measures, people's daily concentrate more on children, while people who use Weibo pay more attention to economic aspects and maternal well-being. The third part involves opinions advocating for women's rights, and Weibo shows the diversity of women's choices, regardless of whether they have a second child or not. Though the discourse on Weibo is not completely free from the state control, however, Weibo offers individuals the possibility to choose what they want to say, what they want to support or oppose. People pay more attention to the issues arising in daily life and their own well-being rather than the larger public interest. Now coming to the last part. This is comments on three Weibo tweets. First one is conflicts between siblings, like I showed earlier in worries about two-child. There are many four voices in Weibo. Importance of family education, distrust of the benefits about having a sibling, such as a sibling can make children's personality better. The problem of the age difference between siblings, which is totally ignored by mass media. And lastly, the denial to have two children. Weibo shows the diversity of real voices in daily life. People are challenging the unconditional praise of two-child with a simple question: why do we need two children? The second tweet is about the abolition of birth planning. Many comments point out that today's young people don't even want to get married, and for the reasons rather than direct reasons such as the cost of childcare, the social environments are often mentioned and criticized, such as high housing price, unfair products. Therefore, policies related to birth planning in general are criticized. This part shows direct criticism of policy transformation and people's confusion about reproductive control. The last tweet is on the legislation protecting women's rights at work, which demands that employers should be responsible. Many comments support the view that these legislations put women at a greater disadvantage in labor market, and many people point out the predicament that women are fallen into by giving examples they see in daily life and thus they criticize the state for treating women as machines for production. It led people to question what a good state and society should actually be. Weibo shows diverse and real voices of the people in daily life, especially the criticism to birth planning policies. In the end, starting from public interest, the People's Daily has supported state-controlled reproduction by indoctrinating the public through rational persuasion. As a media closer to people's daily lives, local newspaper supports the promotion of state-controlled reproduction by addressing and solving problems that arise in everyday life, so as to construct the image of happy four-person family. However, individuals reject the family model expected by the state, but are using social media such as Weibo to make their voices heard, and some are resisting the state's control of production by declaring that they will not even marry, let alone have children. That's all my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sung. That was a fascinating exercise. I would like to commend it to young researchers in this group for how she's gone about it. She looked at 4 sources of information, the major news, party sponsored newspapers, local newspapers, Weibo tweets, and comments on these. So that is 2 in the newspaper, print media, 2 in the social media. And along with that, she had a sort of time dimension as population policies are evolving very fast, but don't seem to be heading anywhere very fast in terms of the results that are thought to be achieved don't seem to be being achieved. Thank you very much for that. That was an excellent presentation. Now we must move on at this moment because time is very little to Usha Chandran, who is looking at really discourse on the family, or in historical terms. Usha, I may ask you to be very brief with that part. And the contemporary situation with or discourse on the family, which is a re-traditionalization, something like what was referred to by Professor Ochiai. So thank you very much. Usha, please come in. Usha, are you there?
Yes, yeah. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll just straight away dive into it. As you can see, my title says family as the core. So as I was exploring, the family as a core, what is the idea of family as a core as per the Confucian philosophy? So I realized that it was much beyond the simple understanding that we all feel that, family as a core could be to, which is used to maintain the social stability and order in the society. But in fact, the Confucian worldview held a hierarchical structure based on the model of family as a core. So I have roughly divided this presentation into 3 parts. In the first, I will look at the family as a core, the concept. And the second, I'll briefly follow its transformation from modern to contemporary to, from traditional to modern to contemporary. And then in the third part, I'll look at the Chinese government, how they are laying this innate importance of keeping family as a core. Now, as per Confucianism, we all know that, heaven is the generator and the father, that is yang, and earth is the nurturer, yin. And these 2 are the cosmic parents of humankind, in which the hierarchical structure of yang to yin is, and the mutual interdependence is also indicated. Therefore, the cosmos as a whole is also structured as a family. strictly abiding by the hierarchy of gender and generation. So starting from Han Dynasty, the cosmic parents were, they received sacrifices from the son of the heaven, that is the king or the emperor, who alone could represent the entire humankind. Now, this started from the Han Dynasty, and the reverence in these ceremonies were that, the participants should be actually male and also must belong to a superior hierarchy. So human society itself was also then represented in two hierarchical modules, the ruling class and the common people. Now, similar to the cosmos, the society was also structured as a family, strictly abiding by the hierarchy of generation and gender. The ruling class, with the emperor at its head, was the father as the young, and the officials as the mother, yin, with the fictive parents. They were actually the fictive parents of the common people. So as to maintain harmony, the emperor used to mediate between the mediate with his officials to actually maintain a harmony in the society. So again, the self-similar pattern of this family, based on yang, yin, and se, that is father, mother, and child, remained as the core, even as the social level descended from world, province, prefecture, country, township, village, household. So this was the structure. Therefore, family, which may seem like the lowest lowest in the social hierarchy and the smallest social institution, may appear to be individualistic and personal. However, under the Confucian state, it is perceived to be a vitally important political unit. So the basis on which the Confucian ideology keep it as a central, as the centrality, was that the whole society is a collective body, and therefore the group interest is always above self-interest. And therefore the idea of family was different in China as compared to the West. Sociologist Fei Xiaotong always translated the word family in China, like jia, into expanded family and not as just family. So consequently, the hierarchy based on position, age, and gender was considered to be a natural pattern in the human society, which actually started from the family. Thus, if the inferior is defined as superior, then it would be against the moral fabric of the society. So therefore, from the starting from Han Dynasty in 2006 BC to the end of Qing Dynasty 1911, the legal enforcement actually treated the family as a mutually responsible group, and therefore a crime done by one member may lead to punishment of all the members. And besides, the head of the family is also given powers and impunity to punish actions against filial piety and gender hierarchy. So therefore, as per the empire, as far as the empire is concerned, family is a political unit which needs to be governed in order to maintain social stability. So therefore, the idea was to apply the virtue of family, that is xiao, and that is the love and affection between father and son, and that men and women are different, to this whole idea. So I'll just skip to the second part. So the Confucian model of family was first challenged with the advent of modernity, but with the establishment of PRC, it was systematically attempted to end, by breaking the family individualism, snatching all powers within the family, by abolishing collective family responsibility, allowing free marriage, organizing groups and associations, and redistribution of family property, etc. Now, this resulted by bypassing the family in the relationship of the individual with the state. However, the family as an institution did exist. And therefore, and later on with the reforms, what happened was, as the modernization theory tells us, that the family structure and relationships and values and beliefs are impacted under the socioeconomic changes and political changes, as well as the advances in science and technology. Therefore, following the changes in people's lives during after reforms, one can say shortly, like increase in income, improvement in living conditions, gap between rural and urban, etc., and one-child policy. With these changes, some scholars argued that perhaps the family is now, the Chinese family may now follow the Western pattern of, industrialized societies. Nonetheless, the mindset of collectivist culture with group interest above the self-interest actually perhaps, and also the individual desire seen as a bad influence from the West, may have kept the family as the core, the idea of family as the core, alive. Now, with the reform and marketization, the government shifted part of the social welfare burden and pressure onto the family. The modern social life in China is deeply rooted in traditional beliefs. However, There's a constant tension between traditional and modern. So the changes in government policies like abolition of old pension system, lack of social security, one-child policy, etc. Actually, with these changes, the family members started striding back to the Confucian mindset of relying on the family, in case of taking care of elderly and children, son preference, as well as the role of women within the family. So therefore, although there were clear signs, there were no clear signs that Chinese society is going back to being typical Confucian model of family, but there were also no signs that they're following the Western structure of nuclear model. So therefore, a unique combination of the two, with family based on collective culture, was showing signs, which was also showing signs of increasing strength, with individual interest are more recognized than ever before, is taking shape in contemporary China today. So to quote from this book, Chinese Family Today, to be married and have children at the appropriate age, lifelong marriage, fulfilling filial obligations, and playing a well-respected role in the family based on social norms are still the ideal life and practice of ordinary people in China. So research has shown that since extended family provide care for the young and aging parents, even when families are nuclear, they're actually closely anchored with the extended family. So they organize their living arrangements to fulfill their family obligations, which are mostly centered around childcare and elderly care of elderly. So there are types of family. If you look at these, I'm not going to elaborate it, but we can look at the diversity, the kind of families that are coming up in China today. So an overview on how family as a unit has reshaped itself is a good case for discussing the traces of traditional beliefs on family clashing with modern ideas and youthful aspirations. Any practice which does not conform with the traditional Confucian idea of marriage and family becomes an irritant to the authorities as well as the society at large. Thus, non-conventional practices like late or no marriage, not having a child, single parenting, same-sex partnership or parenting, live-in or part-time relation, not paying bride price, not helping children to raise grandchildren, etc., are still extremely uncommon in China. Thus, it can be seen that while families in contemporary China reshape themselves as per their functional requirement, they rarely compromise on the Confucian family structure of yang yin, that is the father, mother, and child, based on the hierarchy of generation and gender. Now, the post-reform phase of self-centered individualism witness this old collective system coming to being replaced by individual interest, which has both psychological and political implication. The tension between traditional collectivism and modern individualism can be observed even in government regulations and policies, where there is an attempt to defend the relevance of moral and spiritual values of Confucian social philosophy. One of the earliest signs of Chinese government actually returning to the practice of holding family and kinship responsible for the actions of its members was when the government trusted responsibility of avoiding overbirth by threatening sterilizing the whole family or the whole village in case there is an overbirth during the one-child policy. So even though the Confucian idea of filial piety was politically challenged 3 times at least, but it still holds value in the mind of people and in the law of PRC. So the law stipulates the family members to be mutually obligated, duty-bound, and connecting filial piety directly to inheritance, resulting in more inheritance for sons than daughters, terming actions against filiality as illegal, and lately issuing a guidance on family virtue and role of family in education. So therefore, I'll straight away come to the findings of this study. This study observes that marriage stability and hierarchical structure of family based on gender and generation is still crucial to maintain financial and political stability. More often than not, family not based on father, mother, children is identified by the government and stigmatized into an issue of concern which needs to be addressed through laws. In the past few years, there have been increasing cases of government trying different ways to force people to marry, keep them from separating, and have more children. Chinese law do not protect the rights of couples in cohabitation, and children born to them do not have the same rights. Highly educated, independent, unmarried women are stigmatized as leftover women by the government and pushed to get married, even if it means marrying unmarried rural men. Unmarried adult children dependent on their parents who are lying flat, a silent protest against social and work pressure, are criticized, censored, and banned from social media. So it is not allowed for unmarried women to use assisted reproductive technology, or including IVF and egg freezing, citing safety and ethical concerns. In September 2021, government banned public appearance, including in social media, of the so-called sissy, or the unmanly men, to prevent feminization of teenagers and young men. In order to ease the pressure of bride price, the Civil Code 2021 prohibits bride price or exchange of gifts. So it is clear that it is easier to get married in China than to get divorced. So marriage law stipulates divorce with no fault. However, with the new Civil Code 2020, it adds cooling off period and it stipulates that divorce is possible only if if it is proved that it is broken. So divorce has become increasingly difficult. To promote 2 and 3 children, government is adopting policies which eases the burden of upbringing of children, like cracking down on 996 work culture, banning online tuitions, restricting gaming, etc. Nonetheless, increasing number of Chinese people are more aware than any other time in history. Assisted by technology, they are either openly or silently defying the attempts to control them through family by rejecting to emulate the traditional Confucian model of family. Now, a conclusion. So coming to the conclusion, the social stress caused by the economic gap in post-reform China was one of the prime reasons for Hu Jintao to adopt the idea of establishing a harmonious society. Chinese government is increasingly seen as using the key factor of people's obligation to family to create a harmonious society for national rejuvenation and for common prosperity. By keeping family as the core, Xi Jinping stresses on the interconnectedness between families and the country, claiming family binds the nation and its people, reinforcing traditional family values for national development, progress, and social harmony. Instead of addressing the existing gender issues, Xi Jinping emphasizes on the unique role of women in the family and has actually identified their main service to the nation as caring for the elderly and educating children. Re-emergence of Confucian belief on family is best displayed in Chinese legislation, considering to punish parents if their young children exhibit very bad behavior or commit crimes. So is such a punishment for defying gender hierarchy next in line? Thank you. Sorry for being so fast.
Well, but very good you were so fast, because you could also finish what is quite a complicated presentation spanning, all of Chinese history, really, up to the present and its dilemmas. Now, we have very little time left, and before that we have, and there will be another session for which we'll need to take a break. I think we could, no question and answer session is specified here, but I think we could take just 2 or 3 questions to the paper presenters. Now, there is one I see in the chat box here from Hemant Adlaka to Ms. Sung. He asks, this is Professor Hemant Adlaka from JNU. He asks, is it true, as experts in China are now claiming, that the one-child policy in rural China was actually 1.5-child policy, meaning if the first child was a girl, parents could go for a second child, approved by the local authorities. The other reason this was allowed was to take care of the imbalanced gender ratio in China's countryside. Would you like to comment on that, Ms. Sung?
Yes, I have answered it in the chat. Maybe.
Oh, you have.
Yeah.
I see. Let's see. She says, yes. It's true, actually. It's true. Actually, I have a brother who was born under the 1.5-child policy. The reason for this is because many people in rural places oppose the one-child policy because they need a son to take care of them after they get old. The care for the elderly depends on the family mostly in rural China. In fact, it is a policy that blatantly discriminates against the girls, and that is, I think you mean the one-child policy. And because of this policy, it has led to serious gender imbalance in rural areas so that many men cannot get married now. Of course, India has as Mary John will tell you, India has a really horrendous in parts of the country, gender imbalance, and there's no one-child policy in effect yet. So I don't know whether anyone can put it down to the one-child policy, but obviously it is not unrelated in this case. Any other questions which would like to come up from the audience? I think we could take just one more before we close down. Would anyone put up their hand or like to add to the chat box?
There are some questions in the chat box.
Can you see some more? Yes, I can see one. Yes, Nazar Khan, anyone may answer this. Are there instances of baby marriage in China? Mary, one thing that I think you would have looked at when you were doing your work would have been a custom in certain regions in Eastern China and also in contemporary Taiwan called the adopted daughter-in-law.
Yeah, baby-raised wife. That's what it was called.
Yes,
baby-raised wife.
And that is a very curious custom.
Yeah.
And of course, many people have been trying to explain it, both in terms of household building strategies, in terms of labor strategies, in terms of the costs of marriage, usually on the boys' side rather than the girls, on poverty and various other things. What did you find out about that?
Well,
do you think in a way it may still be something?
No. Simple answer is no.
Yeah.
And the simple answer for India is also no. The stereotype of the baby marriages of, say, Rajasthan, I think should be laid to rest. We have everywhere teenage marriage, not pre-pubertal marriage. So I think that is also very important that, a lot of stereotypes tend to crowd in and pictures tend to have a longer life than they ought to. I think that's one of the baby-raised wife, or whatever phrase was being used, was, from what I've read, was itself considered a low form of marriage, even in its own time. And I think was one of the successes, one might say, of the Cultural Revolution. So the way and I think the remarkable way in which the Chinese Revolution had to combine family marriage with its socialist politics is, to my mind, one of the most remarkable aspects of 20th century history worldwide. They pulled off something there. And what is happening today is, I think, a new moment and should be understood as a new moment. And I don't claim to have answers for the prevalence of, say, teenage, I think let's call it that, teenage marriage in China, though I think the kind of commentary I mentioned makes sense. I mean, nothing much happening in rural China, jobs far away, you fall in love, you get pregnant, and you marry. And the question of when you register it is another question altogether. And the extended familialism argument, I think, would apply here considerably, even more so. In India also, we have teenage marriage, whether for love or as you could say, as a dowry reducing, or simply as a poverty, enabling measure. So the reasons in China and India are really very, very specific and should not be just collapsed with each other. But the fact of it is what I find most interesting in countries where one is marked and the other is invisible.
Mary, you did distinguish between the actual marriage, which is a bond between families, if you like,
yes,
and the gona, the consummation of the marriage, which often takes place sometime after the.
In India, I think that's more or less, yes, you're right. It's more or less disappeared. It's very, very, my own research would show that it's very, very, it's not what it used to be. where is, Rajasthan again being a good example of those kinds of bonds. I think the system just doesn't work when you have those kind of prepubertal ties. These are today post-pubertal. There may still be a few years here or there, but nothing like what we have known in the past. So I think it's very important to update the picture for India as well, and even for regions that have been more stigmatized, like Bengal and Rajasthan have been.
Now, finally, I'd like to put some questions to the panel. Anyone can answer really, but how do you account for the re-familialization of family life, particularly in its care dimension, and all the rhetoric that goes with it? Is it just that governments don't feel like deploying resources on that? Is it then increasing gender bias? Why do you think this is, or is it a neoconservatism which perhaps doesn't need any explanation except that it exists? Now, would anyone like to try and give an explanation? Why? Is it just economic, greedy governments? What's going on? Emiko, would you like to, having heard these various presentations, made your own and done empirical work in two distinct periods in China's contemporary history, what's your, how do you explain it all? The new conservatism with reference to the family, which also is a reinstatement of familial duties to the detriment of women mostly. Yeah.
But it's not only the government, but also the people themselves who want to take care of their kids at home when they are very small. Some of the Chinese people I interviewed said they were not so happy in the nurseries for the full week. So I think, what to say? But they are also suffered from the difficulties in balancing work and life. So people have very ambiguous attitude toward this trend.
Right. Well, look, there are many other questions in the chat box, several other questions. And unfortunately, we don't really have time to go into them. But a very important one is the question of marriage payments. There's a question about, do the Chinese have a dowry system? Actually, it's a dower system or a bride wealth system for the most part. It's the parents of the men who have to collect a great deal of resources in order to get their sons married. But nonetheless, one needs to look at the costs of marriage, including in gifting, celebration, and all that sort of thing. And this is something that is regularly aired. The great costs of getting married, what the man needs to provide a house for his wife, his parents have to buy him that house, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to leave the question of how come the reconfucianization of family values is taking place, and we're left with an even greater question in our minds, having just heard Ambassador Menon's talk, that what is the relationship between this sort of, at the family level of the family and community, these sort of features of social life, internal to China and matched by government policies and regulations and so on, and China's outside conduct. It's really quite a mystery. So we'll leave you with that thought because the organizers need time to change over for the next session. But I would like to say that this has been a very, very rich session. It's a great pleasure to see the amount of empirical work that is going on, so that we're not only dealing with written policies and so on, but we're trying to, as best as possible with limited tools, to map things on the ground. And we see, very rapid and unexpected for socialist societies in many ways changes. Now, we must read that all with in the context of Professor Ochiai's original presentation, saying that if you look at the whole of other countries in Asia, you will find differences with other socialist systems. So it's not quite a question of the political regime. And you will see many other factors which are influencing family life. So there's no simple Asian model, but there are definitely global processes in which all are involved. So thank you, participants, for very rich presentations. It's been a real honor to chair this. And thank you particularly for Usha, who conceived this panel and herself has made a very, very interesting presentation. So we look forward to more of this and not as ever being last and least in any discussion of China. Thank you very much to everyone.